Dr. Seema Anand, the renowned London-based narrative practitioner, author, and social media influencer, and Surbhi Arya, chief editor of Parchment Publications. I will not take much of your time. I strongly feel that women's empowerment is a matter of social justice, allowing equal access to rights, resources, and opportunities, but it is also makes our societies richer and more secure. In other words, women's empowerment is a condition of development and a matter of sustainable peace and security. With this, I conclude my address. I would like to thank all of you present here for making time to be with us. I hope you all have a wonderful evening ahead. And I now hand over the mic to Dr. Seema Anandji to take over the stage with Ambassador Sangita ji and Surbhi Arya for today's event. I thank you all. Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much, and our non-binary friends, everybody. Thank you all so much for being over here with us today. As I sit down once again with my very good friend, Sangeeta Bahadur, to talk about subjects that we both love. Now, this is not the first time that we've talked about things together. We've done a lot of these. Sangeeta is a very old friend, and I just want to tell you that we've actually shared the weirdest holidays together. I have stayed with her, lived with her, and I absolutely love this woman, and I'll tell you why. You know, here is somebody who absolutely refused to believe in the beginning that anything like COVID existed. And then she got COVID, unfortunately, and she was posted as ambassador to Minsk. And the only place I'd ever heard about Minsk was on Friends, you know, when Phoebe's boyfriend is in Minsk. And her daughter is over here. She'll tell you what happened. So there is Sangita alone with her younger daughter, who is on the autistic spectrum, and a lovely girl. And Sherry, who was actually in India at that point, and she'd come to visit. Sangita gets sick, to the point that we almost lost you. She had a ventilator and the works. And then one day, in the midst of her being really ill, while we're waiting for her to come back, the hospital moved her to a different hospital, but they told nobody. And they only spoke Russian, so we didn't know where she was. And she, you know, the embassy is calling up. They're saying, "Hamari ambassador kahan hai?" Like, what have you done with? Nobody knew. They wouldn't tell. The ministry had to call from India. Then we found her again. So she's very precious to me because we lost her and found her a few times. But anyway, so we both at one point ended up working on the same subject, which is Devadasis, without actually knowing it. Sangita was writing a book, yeah? With no idea.
No idea whatsoever that you were also doing something like that, yeah.
So Sangita started to write a book about where the main heroine, the main person, is this very exciting, very empowered Devadasi. And she is a very fabulous woman. You're going to hear more about Kalyani. I, in the meantime, had started to study with Dr. Kersenboom. Now, I want to just tell you a little bit about Dr. Saskia Kersenboom. She's of Dutch origin, teaching at the university in Holland, married to a Hungarian gypsy, living in a place called Legend in Hungary. And she is actually, she was initiated into the Devadasi system. So she studied it, and she is a scholar of Sanskrit and of Tamil and Carnatic music, and I feel really ashamed and embarrassed to say that I have 5 words of Sanskrit. When I studied under her for a year, she plays the veena, she would pull out books. She'll say, no, Seema, this is not what the Rig Ved says. She would pull it out in Sanskrit, read it, and say, this is, and like, okay. So she was amazing. So before we actually start our discussion, I want to tell you 2 things that she told me, which I had no idea about. And I think nobody's going to know about it till you actually learn these 2 things. So the first is, it's the story that you like. In the south, Lord Shiva is known as Tyagaraja, Lord Tyagaraja Swami. Okay? Now, the story goes that in between creation, when the world is finished, and the ocean, the eternal ocean, rises and falls in the gentle waves, and on that ocean lies Anantnag, Sheshnag, the eternal serpent, and he's coiled up, and he's also in long sleep, so he also rises and falls slowly. And on his coils lies Lord Ram, asleep. Lord Vishnu, sorry, excuse me, same thing. But, and again, he's also in peaceful sleep, and his chest falls up and down. And according to this story, on his chest, like a pendant, lies Soma Skanda, which is Shiva with Uma and their child Skanda. So they lie like a pendant on his chest, and they float up and down as he breathes. And suddenly, from this breathing, from this floating action, Ichha is born. Desire is born in Lord Shiva. And he decides that he will become Sagun. He will take on form again and come back to earth. And we are literally the only culture in the world that does not refer to desire as the original sin. We say it is the cause of creation. And as he decides that he's going to come down to earth, at that moment, a little flower blossoms all the way. It's called the Bhoga Lolika, the flower of desire. And it blossoms all the way, not on this beautiful mountaintop or in some fabulous palace, all the way in the mud at the bottom of the underworld, all the way down there. Because it says that now, when pleasure comes back, the people that were left behind, the ones who got turned into scorpions and snakes, who did not reach moksha, they will now have a chance to come back and reapply for moksha, basically. And I think that is just such an incredible idea. So when Lord Shiva, as Tyagaraja, comes down to earth, he's worshipped with 3 goddesses. So he's worshipped with Virya Shakti, which is the outside Shakti, Jiva Shakti, which is the inside Shakti, and Bhogya Shakti. She's the goddess of pleasure. And in her name, you have the Devadasis.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably one of the nicest stories that I know. Sorry, you were going to add something to the story. I'm going to come back to the second bit later.
In the sense that, of course, I've heard this story from you. And when I was doing my research on Devadasis, I did just enough to allow me to write this book. Actually, I'm not as, I didn't have, so much time since I was a working diplomat at the time when I was writing this book and all. But whatever little I found out about them was very fascinating because it is a tradition that goes back into the hoary past. Nobody really knows when the Devadasi system really started. So some say, it started thousands of years ago. Some say it started in the south of India, maybe around, a couple of centuries before Christ. Some say that it actually started during the Gupta period. And there's also some story that I came across about there being this very great queen in a dynasty which ruled the Kalinga Empire, or today's Orissa, as you would say. And she was the one who decided that, the society needed a group of women that would be called the Devadasis, who would serve the gods, who would dance for the gods, perform for them, and in general be regarded as the epitome of feminine power, I would say. So there was something for people to aspire to in that day and age. And as per the legend about this queen, she decreed that they all had to be, they could not really entertain men or could not, they were celibate. And that was not the condition during the Gupta period, because we do know that the system existed at that time. Because Kalidas, you have probably all heard of him, who is often referred to as the Indian Shakespeare, although it should be the other way around, because Kalidas predated Shakespeare by centuries, right? So Kalidas in his Meghadutam, that beautiful poem that he's written, which again I've also read in English, because just like Seema, my Sanskrit is limited to a few mantras. But during the Gupta period, it was a totally different thing altogether, because they were allowed to, not allowed to, I would say, because it was their role to be these kind of leading lights in society. So they were held in very high esteem, they held a very high status, and they could pick and choose their consorts. Not just one, they could have a succession of them, but it was entirely their pleasure. So this book that I have written that Seema was mentioning, we didn't even know that we were working on a similar theme at one point of time. So in that book, I have sort of, predated this whole Gupta period thing by a century and a half, so that I have fictionally said that the Devadasi system actually started way back in the 6th century BCE, long time ago. And it was, well, I'm not going to tell you anything more about it, how it was started, etc., because, you'd rather read it for yourself in the book. But since the book is a kind of a historical fantasy, or if you want to call it an alternative history, so it deals with the Devadasi tradition in a very different way. It's a lot of it is a combination of everything that I've heard about Devadasis, a little bit of history that I dug up about them, a lot of things that Seema has told me about, the Devadasi system, as also, as you'll discover, the goddess Baglamukhi, who is a very integral part of this, and she was the one who told me about that thing. And then another very interesting thing that she told me, which again, I would say that perhaps not exactly for the Devadasis, but perhaps people who frequented their performances, etc., and maybe at some stage lost their hearts and had a different kind of a relationship with them, and then later on maybe went on to have regrets about that. She told me about this place called Kameshwar, right? Kameshwar, which is somewhere in Kashmir by our estimation, and there you have a shrine called the Khandashila, and there people apparently go to cleanse their souls of, if you want to call it a sin, the sin of adultery. So all these things, she's the one who pointed me, and as I started writing about the Devadasis and everything, all these things just sort of flew in a very fluid way, and they just sort of knit themselves into this this whole, which even surprised me, because this was not the kind of story I started writing about Devadasis. I thought of it as a much more modern yarn kind of a thing, and a much more depressed and depressing story, because at that time I was being told that that's all that sells. People don't want to read about happy things. I don't think that's true, but that's the kind of
we like happy things.
We like happy things. So, but then as I started writing, it just worked itself into a very different, a very empowering story about women, and all the things that I'd read about the Devadasis, whatever happened to them later, because like all systems do, the Devadasi system also deteriorated. But initially, I thought it was one of the most empowering concepts that any civilization had come up with.
Definitely. I think, sorry, just to point out, so like Sangita said, she started to write it as this very earnest, slightly depressed, because that's what we hear about women's narratives, right? It's all about the sacrificing woman, the sad woman, the good woman who keeps silent through it. And we keep saying we need different stories.
And
different
exploited,
stories.
let's not
exploited women who just put up with everything. We need different stories, powerful stories that you can actually read and say, yeah, this is what I aspire to be. So that's what Kalyani turned out as, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Because she actually, when I read about Kalyani, you know, sometimes when I think about all the problems I go through, and I think, okay, I'm going to deal with that person's abuse by being totally calm and raising one eyebrow and just looking, and I can never do that because I kind of fall apart and I'm like, how can you do? But Kalyani does that. So she became my aspirational moment. But just to come back to, again, what I was saying about what Dr. Kirstenboom taught me. So Dr. Kirstenboom actually, Saskia went and lived with the Devadasis, and she was initiated into the Devadasi system, and she learned all about them. And she told me something really interesting, because every now and then we face this question on casteism. And she told me, you know, now in Tantra, we have this, again, this idea that in the rituals, especially the sexo-yogic rituals that take place, there is always a woman from a lower caste who is involved in those rituals. And what Dr. Kirstenboom explained was that she said, you know, the idea is to absorb the evil. Now, if you take a Brahmin who's very, very pure, and he does not have the ability to absorb inauspiciousness.
Probably just shatter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea was to have somebody who could actually absorb the inauspiciousness, and from absorbing it, they became auspicious. That's what made them auspicious, which is a little bit of a roundabout way to put it, but it's the only explanation till now that I've had that makes a little bit more sense than anything else. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I just want to add something which may take a little bit of time for you to understand because it's a bit deep. But what she said to me was that the Devadasis, along with the erotic rituals and everything that we know them for, their main role was to absorb the leftovers. And by that, what she said was, it's like when you do something, you have a certain amount of energy that you use. And you use that energy to do that particular task, but what happens to the energy that is left over? You know, when we talk about a big event that you do, you pull in all that energy to do stuff, and then you have this anticlimax with the rest, and that's when the depression creeps in and so on. So they believe that, like, even the food that you give as prasad to God, some bit God has, the rest comes away. That's the leftover bit. And that's where, according to our legends, according to our stories, that's where the demons enter from. That's where the evil enters from. So their main job is to guard the leftovers. Especially, I think, in terms of energy, because whether it was the god's energy or the king that they then became associated with or whatever. But I know that there is something about the attributes of the Devadasis that you use, so.
Yes, well, to tell you frankly, I had no idea of this, what she's talking about right now, because as I said, my research was only limited to what I could actually use in the book, so I didn't really go down that road very much. But without knowing this, when the Devadasi system is started, at least according to this book, there's a list of conditionalities that have been put for the women who would be chosen to be Devadasis. So there are physical attributes, there are spiritual attributes, there are mental attributes that the person concerned had to have. And again, although she said, as she said, mostly the women in the actual Devadasi system, many of them came from the lower castes, etc. Without knowing that, what I have said is in this, that the woman who's chosen, it doesn't matter. Once she's chosen, it doesn't matter what her caste is, which, like economic level she comes from, etc. She could be a rich man's daughter, she could be an aristocrat's daughter, she could be somebody who's grown up on the streets or whatever. Once she's chosen, they all become equal, and they are to be treated in the same way by the king and by the society in general. So once you are a Devadasi, you rise above the what is expected of normal women in your milieu. So that was the whole idea, because now, the more I'm hearing from Seema, I'm realizing that probably this is something that, we as women, you probably have these aspirations inside you. You probably, all of us instinctively feel that way, that this is how we should be treated, this is how, the kind of, because, this is a story about a woman's right to choose, I would say, which is being increasingly denied to us in this modern world, and probably has been for a very long time, but it's becoming more and more evident as like society seems to be turning barbaric rather than more civilized. At least that's my view. So how I got these ideas and why I incorporated them, because I really did not know about the depths of the Devadasi tradition at all. I just knew the factual bits about it. But I have a feeling that it's all very instinctive. So it was all there inside, and somewhere from our, racial memory or whatever, we sort of pull it out, and then it just goes into the story.
While you were talking, it just reminded me, one of the things, so I talk a lot about jewelry and how it was supposed to make your body move. One of the things that we talk about a lot, Kalidas mentions it in several of his plays as well, is that the women would wear flower girdles around their hips, but the girdles were supposed to be a little bit too big. So you had to walk with a certain swaying motion and at a certain pace to make sure that they didn't slip down.
Like hula hoops.
Almost like hula hoops, but more beautiful.
Yeah.
And so in this case, when, in Kumar Sambhavam, which is the birth of Lord Kumar by Kalidas, when Parvati is still very young before she gets married, and she goes up each time when Lord Shiva is out there in the mountains, and she goes to offer him food when he's meditating. And she's young, and she hasn't yet learned how to do that. And it's this beautiful description of how each time she goes with that swaying walk, and, the girdle keeps slipping down, and she's pulling it back up again. And I was just thinking, when the Devadasi system started, the idea is that God was supposed to be worshipped with song and dance, because we think of that as auspicious, that's beautiful. And the fact that when you think much later about Mirabai, who has the nerve to sing and dance because she is in love with Lord Krishna, and she's told, "Ye kharab hai, log kya kahenge?" You've been silenced. You cannot be visible. And these were women who were allowed to express their femininity. They were allowed to express their bodies. They were allowed to express their inner desires. And I think that really is what strikes it for me. Yes, like Sangita said, things do change. But I keep coming back to the visibility factor. When you do all of your shringhar, you put on all your beautiful jewelry, you dress up in all those gorgeous clothes, you go out there and you stamp your feet when you do your Bharatnatyam. There's nothing invisible about you. You are out there to be seen. And I think that's so empowering. And that was taken away at some point, wasn't it?
Definitely. And, sometimes when I think about it, it strikes me how, even Christianity has this thing about, the nuns who are married to Christ, as they say. So our Devadasis were supposedly married to the deity that they served. But look at the difference.
There are also female deities sometimes that they were married to.
Exactly.
So Yallama Renuka.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Devadasis that are her brides.
So, but look at the role of the two kinds of bride. While a nun would spend her entire life just kneeling in prayer and, just rubbing their knees raw, our Devadasis were out there, as Seema says, displaying their beauty, their art, their talent, their dresses and jewelry, and just enchanting everyone. So there was nothing in our civilization, I think there's nothing that says that a woman who displays herself or displays her body or who looks beautiful and
becomes visible.
Or becomes visible is bad or is evil or is like, they're mostly the people of the book, as they call themselves. That is a very chauvinistic way of looking at women because, women are treated as something that should not be seen, should not be heard, can only be used. So that has never been the case with our system. So this is something that the Devadasis really teach you, but this is what also scared the British, when they came and they started sort of getting familiar with their new empire in India. And they realized, wow, there are these women who are a challenge to all of us and a challenge to the very masculine and a very chauvinistic worldview that they had of women's role in the world, their place in the world, etc. So, and they could never, for them, a woman who displayed herself like that, who danced in public, who sang in public, who was supposedly married to, this deity, but could also bestow her favors on, a chosen lover if she felt like it. For them, it was an unimaginable abomination, I would say, because it was so different from their concept of nuns, for example. So and besides, they could not really ever learn to distinguish between the devdasis and the dancers who performed for, for people in the streets, or the ganikas, as they were called in ancient India, the courtesans. So it was very, for them, they were all the same. So as a result, it was like to preserve the morality of society, and they, in any case, thought that we Indians were very immoral. So they sort of, in 1934, they actually brought a law called the Bombay Devdasi Protection Law. And in 1934, they banned the Devdasi system in many ways. I think there were some exceptions here and there, or maybe it was a region-specific thing. But they brought in this thing, and as a result, the Devdasi system lost the status, the elevated social status that they had. At the same time, because the Devdasis used to be patronized by kings and rulers, etc., and suddenly once the British took over, that source of income for the Devdasis dried up. So nobody was there to take care of them, to give them the, wherewithal to support themselves. So what is any woman left with in a situation like this? Prostitution, right? So that is how many of them actually turn to prostitution. So it was like, because they are immoral, let's ban them, create a situation where they cannot support themselves in any other way, force them to turn into prostitutes, and then blame them for that. So it was a very convoluted kind of a mix at that time. And then you were saying that in 1947...
Yeah, so I think sanitization has a long way of moving forward. So yeah, I think the Devadasis eventually end up almost like at the crossroads of tradition and poverty. Like Sangita said, that they no longer have a source of income, but there's still the tradition of this. So actually, the final ban on them came in 47, so 3 months after we got independence. And it was, I guess, a follow-on from there, because things, unfortunately, in a lot of places had become quite bad. So there were young girls being sold into the system against their will. So there was all sorts of problems. But we were just discussing how even after the independence, there is a certain mindset that stays. It takes time for the mindset to change, right? And Rukmini Devi, who is the very, very famous dancer, she was actually responsible for changing quite. So she wanted to bring back the system of the dance. So she actually comes back and she changes quite a few things. So originally it was called Dasiyattam. So it was what the Devadasis would perform. So she changes the name to Bharatnatyam. And what she also did was she took out a lot of the very erotic part of the, a lot of the, our erotic narrative is in metaphor. It's not straightforward. It's not like, oh, this is what they were doing. But the metaphors were there. And those were pulled out of the Devadasi system. So even now, I think in some of the temples, like in Jagannath, where the dances still take place, the Devadasis still do the dance. So they perform it twice daily. So one happens in the morning next to the Garuda pillar, which is the outside dance. And then one dance happens in the evening when God is ready to go to bed. And that happens inside. And then the Devadasi does that dance, and then she comes out and says, now God is asleep. So that dance was supposed to have certain other connotations, because this is like the last bit of relaxation, the last bit of play before you go to sleep. So I think that unfortunately we lost a great deal of that, which has been most of my work, just to actually reintroduce people to those metaphors, because they're beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you that over the years, I think the role of women has been so sanitized, even in art, even in dance, that as Seema was saying, all elements of sensuality, sexuality have just been taken out, and you are just supposed to be one of these people who just, if you're dancing for the God, you dance in the pure spirit of devotion and nothing else comes through. And one of the points that I've raised in my book is that kind of devotion, that kind of, totally sanitized clinical kind of devotion gives no pleasure to a deity, because gods are a playful lot, and for them to have this kind of very, very formal and very, very, dispassionate kind of a, performance for them, or even the kind of lifestyle that, most women are supposed to follow, and, that which is supposed to be the good way of doing things, it does not bring them any pleasure, because for them, creativity is something that is precious, because that creates the world, that has created all life forms, including the human life on earth. So if the woman, who is the creator, as per because Shakti, as you were saying, 3 forms of Shakti with Shiva. So all 3 forms of Shakti, especially the last one, is what are responsible for the creation of this world, for the creation of humanity, for the creation of all the wonderful things in the world, right? Including the fine arts and, everything that gives us pleasure as human beings. So if you take that away from women, that is the true disempowerment to which they are subjected. So unless they are able to exercise their right to choose, their right to be creative, their right to decide what they want to do with their life, with their sensuality, with their sexuality, with their bodies, etc., you are just, if you follow the patriarchal mindset, it is basically all about sanitization, all about control. Whereas the feminine
And
mindset
silence.
is very different. It's the exact opposite. It thinks always of the betterment of the human race, of how to, to broaden the base, so to say. Left to men, probably the entire humanity would be the product of one man, right? If they could kill off everyone else. So that is, again, a premise that I thought a Devadasi would represent, because she is, she was always the symbol of feminine choice, feminine liberty, liberation, whatever you want to call it. So that is why I decided that my protagonist would be, well, in the book, she calls herself a Devadasi to begin with, because the Devadasi system, you understand, has not begun before her. So she is a Devadasi, and she says that they are the worshippers of Shakti in her various manifestations. So Baglamukhi being one of them. So to give you a little hint, she is a devotee of Baglamukhi.
Let's tell them who Baglamukhi is.
Yes.
Does anybody know about Baglamukhi? She's my favorite goddess.
Yeah.
So in the so there are 10 goddesses known as the Mahavidyas. And the Mahavidya basically means the goddesses of ultimate knowledge. And the Mahavidyas literally come together in 1000 AD as a group. So they're not new goddesses. None of them are new goddesses. It's 10 goddesses, and they have a hierarchy. So the topmost one is Kali, then is Tara, then is Tripura, Sundari, and so on. None of them are new goddesses, but for some reason, we don't know what, they come together as a group and they become the Mahavidyas, and Lakshmi is one of the Mahavidyas. She's at the bottommost rung as Kamla. What's very interesting is that the Mahavidyas are only worshipped with tantric rituals. So they all the goddesses have Hindu identities and they have tantric identities. So they're worshipped in dual form. Baglamukhi is number 8 on the thing. And we want to tell you about Baglamukhi because she's my favorite. Baglamukhi is the goddess where breath meets wisdom. She's the goddess of ultimately intelligent speech. And they say that she can give you the power of such intelligent speech that with it, you can paralyze your enemy. So she's supposed to be the goddess of lawyers and politicians. You go to the Baglamukhi temple around election, you have no idea who you're going to meet over there. Everybody turns up. And I absolutely, now most people are petrified of the Baglamukhi worship because they believe, it is very powerful, but they believe that there's a lot of cremation ground practices involved with it. But the thing is, people always...
There is a very famous temple somewhere near Ujjain,
isn't it? It's in the, next to this Kamakhya.
Kamakhya.
And I have to say, I went there a couple of months ago and I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed because it was like a sanitized version of this thing. All they kept saying, Paise de do, dan dalo, dan dalo. Like nobody, you don't get a chance to. I have worshipped this goddess with every mantra I can tell you, like she is it for me. It was very disappointing anyway. So Baglamukhi is who she's talking about. I just wanted to put that
So,
in.
apart from what Seema is saying, when I read a little bit more about Baglamukhi, I also figured out that she is supposed to be the goddess who shears away your illusions and delusions and forces you to face who you really are. So, it is in that role that I have used her in this story. Because, um, you know, just to give you a little premise of how this book connects to the Devadasi system and where it begins. As I said, it's based in the 6th century BCE, and at that time there was this huge kingdom in India called Avanti. Many of you, of course, those of you who've seen Bahubali, you would have heard of Mahishmati, right? I mean, they keep saying Jai Mahishmati, that's the kingdom that they rule. But actually, Mahishmati was the southern part of Avanti. Avanti was a much bigger political unit, and Mahishmati was just the southern part of it. So this, the one I picked to be my protagonist in this whole saga about Devadasis, was the second king of a dynasty called Pradyot. Why I picked him was because while it is a fairly well-known dynasty in the sense that I had certainly heard of the Pradyot dynasty at some stage, but nothing very much is known about their individual kings. So, except for the founder king, whose name was Pradyot, and he was supposed to be like one of those really cruel kind of. You would all have heard of how Ashok, when he went slightly bonkers, before the Kalinga thing, he was known as Chand Ashok, right? Because he was totally merciless and totally cruel. So this guy,
Before he becomes Buddhist.
that's right. So this guy Pradyot was also known as Chand Pradyot. So you can imagine the extent of his, his cruelty and his. So my protagonist is his son, Palak. So now Palak, I have no idea what he was like, what he did, etc. I only know that he expanded his father's kingdom and he was a good king overall. But I took the premise that he is a misogynist of the first waters, and for various reasons. He's had certain experiences as a child, while he was growing up, etc. So he distrusts women, not just distrusts them, he hates them. He thinks they are absolutely, awful witches whose only desire in life is to ruin everybody's life, right? So starting from that premise, and so he's imposed all kinds of sanctions against women. This is how you're supposed to dress, this is how you're supposed to behave, this is you have to cover yourself adequately, because in those days women in India used to be pretty carefree about how they dressed. If you've seen old paintings and sculptures, you know that. So this guy imposes all kinds of restrictions, etc. And then he's very surprised that somehow his kingdom seems to be turning infertile in many ways, like not just the land, but the cattle and the people and everything around him is just, people have just stopped being productive in any sense. There are all kinds of, natural disasters that are happening, and, various things. He goes for a war, with the empire of Magad, which at one stage was actually terrified of his father, because, they say that they erected the Patliputra fort because they wanted to keep Chand Pradyot at bay. So they were also scared of him, but he actually loses that war very badly. And from there, his journey towards the understanding of what a woman wants, what her right to choose, and how important that is to set her creativity free, and therefore to change the fortunes of his entire kingdom. So once he understands that, then resolutions start happening. And that is when my Divyadasi, not Devdasi, comes into the picture. And as Seema was saying, she's one phenomenal woman. I think all of you will fall in love with her, because I am sort of, if I were a man, I would, I don't know if I'd really be...
I'm in love with her.
Totally.
She's the woman I want to be.
That is the thing. So for me also, while I was writing this book, I was also going through a lot of personal turmoil of many kinds, and I had started feeling very disempowered, as though, my choices had been taken away. I didn't know what was happening, where I was going. Plus with retirement looming large, it's always very traumatic for government servants, right? So when I started writing this, so in a way, this became my ideal. This is the kind of woman I want to be. Of course, probably I won't go to the extents that she does, but because of the fact that she's a free spirit and she knows exactly what she wants and she knows exactly what needs to be done for the fertility to return to the kingdom. So she literally, Palak is told that she's your salvation. So I won't go into who tells him and why it happens, etc. But he is told that she is your salvation. And somehow, by whatever means, hook or crook, if you have to make promises, do that. If you have to beg, do that. But somehow persuade her to marry you, because she's not the man. I mean, the entire system is made of women who are not brought up to be, wives and mothers, etc. And she tells him that when he insists and he says, please, 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 because So then she marries him on certain conditions. One of the conditions being that he will never question anything she says, does, thinks, acts upon, dresses the way she does, whatever it is. The moment he says anything or asks her for an explanation for anything she's doing, she will leave him straight away and go back and never come back. So he's, at that point, she literally has him by the short hairs, right? And she's leading him by the nose, and he finds himself in the most awkward of situations, which, if he was open to the idea of women and their choices and their creativity, would not shock him, but they do, because he's not. So that was the whole premise. And then at some stage, she's the one who, in fact, I based this on the story I told you, not the story, but the legend that exists about this great queen from the Kalinga Empire who started the Devadasi system. So I've taken elements of that, and I've used that to, to sort of make my female protagonist something like that. So she's the one who suggests that, while the Devadasis are a very, very elite and a very, very close group who have only one purpose in life, that is to serve Baglamukhi's purpose of, shearing away all your illusions and delusions. But she says we need women like that to be more available to the public in general, to be there as the epitome of feminine power, creativity, etc. And therefore, you need to create this cadre. This, if you want to call it a cadre, you want to call it a system or whatever. So that's how, according to this book, the Devadasis come into being. And who knows, that may have been, at some stage, the actual way in which they were created.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually believe that every 1,000 years, there is this wave, feminism, wave of feminism. And literally, so I think it happened then it happens in 1000 AD. And I come back to them, Baglamukhi and the rest of the Mahavidyas, because as I was saying, that they're worshipped in tantric rituals only. And what's interesting is that they are worshipped without any kind of male consort. So even Lakshmi, Kamla, who otherwise, as our Hindu goddess, is always seen within the protective circle of Lord Vishnu's arms, she's not worshipped with him. He doesn't feature in her worship at all. So there's definitely, I think, there is a wave, and we're now back at that wave. And ladies and gentlemen, and all our other guests over here, you're all part of that wave, so yay you. But I think that I just want to ask you, so we are now both the same age. Sangita doesn't like to mention her age.
She's 3 months younger.
Okay. No. 2 months younger. But I have gray hair, so it makes me older. But we've kind of been through certain things in our life. And we've crossed certain rivers of fire to get to where we are. My husband, who's sitting over there, would beg to differ, but I'm telling you, it's very hard living with men of that generation. But anyway, we've crossed rivers of fire to get to where we are. And we have achieved certain things. So we have certain ideas of what we see when we see an empowered woman. And I was just thinking, if you had written this story when you were much younger, would Kalyani have been different? Like, would this, because we're looking at your protagonist, Kalyani, as this ultimate woman, that very empowered, like she is literally that. Would she have been different?
Very different. I'm sure she would have been more of a Milson Bourne heroine than anybody else because, at that age when you're younger, the masculine presence in your life is somehow very essential. At least it was to women of our age. I know most of the young people here do not think like that anymore. But I'm sure, and she would have been much softer. There would have been a definite element of romance to it rather than pure love. Because here what comes across is pure love. Because, that is what she's there to teach him. Not romance, not making gestures, bringing of flowers, etc. No, that's not the thing. I mean, she's there to teach him to not just love her, but respect her. And in return, she wants to do the same for him. So she's a very strong woman, and nothing like I, unfortunately, have ever been able to be on my own, but which I'm now striving towards at this late age, but trying to be something like that to whatever extent I can. But yeah, very different from what, even if I had written this book just maybe 10 years ago, she would still have been very different. This thing came out of, as I was saying, a lot of my own inner turmoil, my despair, my desperation, my desire to break out of that, that kind of mental prison in which I myself had put myself. I wouldn't blame anybody else for that, because when you decide to be in a situation, when you know it's wrong, it's bad for you, it's wrong for you, who's to blame? You are, right? So despite that, because I was trying to break out of it, so this character, this particular Devadasi was born out of that fire that was going on inside me, that cleansing fire, I would say.
You know what's interesting is that when we worship any of the Mahavidyas, including the goddess Kali, they use the, what's that called, the winnowing basket? क्या उसको कहते हैं? जिसमें वो
Soup.
नहीं, what is that? Like that basket जिसमें you have the rice and you separate the rice from the husk? The cane thing there. What's it called? Sorry? A winnowing basket.
A winnowing basket, yeah, that's right.
A winnowing basket. You know what I'm talking about, right? I can't remember the word for it in Hindi. But the idea that is you. Sorry. Did somebody
No.
The idea of that is, most people think that it's because it sort of separates the important from the... It's not. It's about transformation. Because you transform that thing that you're using, which has got the husk on it, into rice, which can then be used. So it is all about transformation.
Yeah.
And I think that we all get over there, and we all have this idea of where we would like to be. But it is something that comes with, and it's something that we